Shawnte, it's great to see you. Obviously, welcome to the Phase 3 Biotech Leadership Podcast. We're here today to talk about how do leaders, or why should leaders transcend their function to become a more holistic business leader? And really excited to get into this one because I think, it's a subject that is or needs to be discussed, and the need for business leaders that can work cross-functionally at a C-suite level, at a board level, that demand is only going up and up and up. So glad that you can be here to join us for that.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I look forward to this conversation, Ellie.
Great. Well, look, in order to get things started, would you mind just giving a little bit of background on yourself, so that the audience can get an understanding of where you've come from, and then let's jump into things.
Sure. So I'm originally from the Los Angeles area. I went to Stanford undergrad with the intention, I graduated with a biological sciences degree, intending to go to medical school. I wanted to deliver babies. But I took a gap year or two after college. And during that time, I realized that while I love medicine and it was really interesting and really fascinating, and sciences overall, I was not interested in being a doctor anymore. I didn't think I had the passion that I think is required in order to do that. And so that required a pivot, and a pretty big pivot really fast. And I had to look around and figure out what I wanted to do next. And a friend of mine was going to law school. And when I started to investigate it, I realized that there was this area of the law that was healthcare law. And so I thought, it would be great. I could use my scientific skill sets and my interest in healthcare. I would just do it differently and deploy it in a different way. So I went to law school, left law school, and went to Ropes and Gray. They had, at the time, the most preeminent healthcare practices, was in the DC area, and really liked it. But one of the beautiful things about Ropes was not only was I in the healthcare group, but I was generally in the corporate group. So I got to do all kinds of fun stuff. I got to do deals. I got to do M&A. I got to do debt finance. I got to do venture work. I spent some time seconded at BMS, so I got to understand what it meant to be in-house. And so I just got to touch a lot of really interesting things. And when I was there, I realized that I really liked the corporate work. And I thought the deal work was really interesting and really fun. And then 2008 came, and there was no deal work to be done. And so I had to think about, okay, what do I want to do next? So again, had to pivot, and I got an opportunity at Emergent Biosolutions, who was looking for an M&A counsel. And that M&A counsel position was exactly what I wanted to do, because going in-house allows you to have one client instead of a bunch of clients, and you could participate at various stages of the transaction process as opposed to just at the end. And so I went in-house, and I spent a good amount of time at Emergent, where I learned a bunch of leadership skills, where I learned what it means to be a biological drug manufacturer, what I learned what it means to do transactions, what I learned as I was there as the assistant secretary of this publicly traded company, what it means to be a public company, what it means to be in the boardroom, how being on the board looks different than being in management. And then Emergent decided to do a spinoff and created a separate company, Aptivo Therapeutics, based in Seattle. And I was chosen by my wonderful mentor, who also was the CEO of that company, to be the general counsel of that company. And so I got this really great opportunity to sit in the chair, and it was a really wonderful place and a really wonderful opportunity to sit at the executive team table as a member of the executive team and figure out and learn all of these things we're talking about, which is you transcend your function. Yes, I was the general counsel, but I wasn't just the general counsel. I was a business leader of this organization, working with all the other functions to make this organization successful. I was at Aptivo for 4 years, and then COVID happened, and thought it would be nice, instead of being in Seattle, to be a bit closer to home. And so I went to Zogenix for a bunch of reasons. The one of those being because it was in the Bay Area, and it's nicer during COVID with 2 kids and a husband to be closer to my family, be a drive away from my family as opposed to a plane ride away. So I was at Zogenix for 2 years. Luckily, as happens, we got acquired in those 2 years by UTC. And then having spent all of my career in life sciences and pharma, I thought this might be my next role, might be a good opportunity to kind of try something a little different, a different industry. And so I left there and went to a company called Geomedica, which is a biotech company, but in the sustainability space, the production of chemicals. And so I was there until earlier this year when I left. And so now that is my career kind of in a nutshell. All of my experiences have been what has been really helpful in my growth and just to be, I think all of them add to helping me be a valuable member of the executive team. Because I've seen a bunch of stuff, I've done a bunch of things, and I've worked with a lot of different people over time.
Absolutely. And well, what a journey it's been. And, something which is interesting, even just looking at that, is the fact that, Ropes and Gray, you start off talking about M&A and deals. Then you move over into a company, correct me if I'm wrong, Emergent, and probably wasn't just organic growth. There was probably some deals that happened there. You end up in a company that actually gets acquired. So you're on the other side of the table. So you really have seen the full spectrum.
Yeah.
I think there are, I would have so many questions. I'd love to just sit down, have a glass of wine and talk about, even how do companies position for acquisition and things like that. I think that's something that many boards aspire to happen, right? Everybody wants a lovely exit and things like that. But I'm not sure that everybody knows how to truly make it happen, or things like that. But before we get into maybe being one of those board members, being able to leverage experiences and things like that to really help position and help a company along, I think I'd like to go back to this idea of maybe pivot, because the one thing you seem very good at is pivoting, unafraid to maybe make changes. So if you think back to, young Shawnte and then, slightly wiser, but maybe going in a different direction, Shawnte, how did you make those leaps? Because I think a lot of people talk themselves out of doing that and maybe become fearful or something around that. How did you reason that out?
So my first big leap actually was after college when I
Yeah.
decided that I wanted to live in New York and I didn't have a job. And I knew a few people who were in New York, but I had stayed there a summer and fell in love with New York City. And so I was moving after. And so I took the leap. I saved my little monies over the summer, packed my bag, and I moved, assuming that it would all work out. And
Right.
it did all work out actually quite well. But I had a plan and I sat down and I made a plan. Okay, this is what I was going to do. I was going to save and I needed this much money. And so I think that big leap and the fact that it worked and I was able to be thoughtful about how I was going to do it. I made decisions after careful consideration and made a plan, and then you execute on it. And then you figure out, or that there's ways that you can pivot out of it. And so if it doesn't work out, then there's a plan B and you can survive with that plan B as well. And so that has been super helpful to me. I also know that, I was also instilled actually, I knew that when I left college and I left home, like I had to figure it out. But my parents are great. My parents are super supportive. And if, I had wanted to come back home, I could have. But I also knew that there was an expectation that, I was an adult now. So I was going to need to figure it out. And I really wanted to be able to do that. And so when I decided I didn't want to go to med school, I knew I had to figure out what I wanted to do next. And you sit down and you make your plan and you think about it and weigh your options. And then you take the step, you take the leap. And, if it doesn't work out, you can always, like I said, figure out another option. You can figure out another way. But you should, for me, it was the best decision I ever made. I know I have tremendous tremendous respect for my physician friends. I don't have anybody who can do all of those things. But I know that it was right for me not to go in that direction. And it was right for me to go the way that I went.
So I think trusting instincts, but then grounding those instincts in an actual plan, right? Hope is not a strategy, as it were. More kind of, knowing that there were tangible steps and what you wanted to take. And you seem to have, executed on that several times over.
Yeah, I think if you sit down and you reason out, okay, what do you want to do? What are some reasonable steps for you to get there? And you execute on that plan, then it helps you clearly to feel a lot more comfortable about doing whatever it is you're doing. It doesn't feel so much like a leap that you've got a plan that you've thought through carefully and you're just working the plan.
For sure. So obviously when it comes to pivoting, right, we then go on an enormous run, really. And if anyone sits down and looks at your career progression, it's fast. I'm not sure you would say. I think you're too modest to say it's fast, but
Say
it
that.
it,
Okay.
it's fast, and ultimately, moved up the ranks can obviously contribute great value as you did so. I guess one of those things is there was opportunity in the companies you were in, right?
Absolutely.
Because there was change, and maybe even to a point, dare I say, instability, right, in these companies,
Mhm.
because they're taking risks, they're trying things, they're trying to grow. If I remember rightly, Emergent at one point had a therapeutics arm, a vaccines arm, a
Mhm.
CDMO arm, and all of those were in some kind of flux over the time that you were there. Um, so when you saw this, the changes which were there, it seems like you saw opportunity,
Mhm.
Shawnte, opposed to focusing in on just maybe instability, right?
Mhm.
Or a lack of security or something like that.
Yeah, I'm always looking for opportunity. One of the things that I do annually is right at the beginning of the year, what is my goals for the year, or things I want to accomplish this year, what I want to accomplish in 5 years, what I want to accomplish in 10. And so I'm looking for opportunities to help check the boxes on those activities.
Sure.
And so and I've also had the benefit of having some really great mentors, and I've had the benefit of having some, I started my executive coach journey, gosh, when I was an emergent. And so I've had the benefit of having, coaches and mentors who I've been able to bounce ideas off of and think about things.
Sure.
Or certainly, I have tried to take advantage of the opportunities that have been provided. I've also been looking for opportunities. If I'm at a company and they, they have an initiative that they need doing, and it seems terrible, but it's going to get me in the room with the right people. I'm going to sit with the executive team and run this thing. Then that's the opportunity I was going to need to take in order to make, get to the next level. And so I was always looking for, like I said, opportunities and ways to be positioned, people that I should know, and taking a leap for those opportunities and taking a leap to meet the people that I thought would be important for me to meet. Like I said, the person who was CEO, Marvin White, who's also still a CEO of Aptivo, he was my mentor. And I took a leap and I asked him, will you be my mentor? And that's how he became my mentor. And I learned a lot from him and was able to bounce ideas off of him and was able to, just watch how he operates. And it was incredibly beneficial. So I would just keep your eyes open is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think there's also, this is a theme that comes back around whenever I speak to people, who've done really well, is the role that mentors have played.
Never.
And I think it takes, first of all, it takes openness on the side of the mentee to say, maybe I don't know it all. Maybe I should check my ego and go ask someone else. But then it's also about selecting the right mentor, right?
Yeah.
And having that connection. So obviously, with Marvin, it seems to have been a really good pairing.
Yeah.
Was that just a feeling? Again, I'm always intrigued about how do people select and things like that.
Yeah. So, I had been at a number of conferences where the advice was given that you need a mentor, you need a sponsor, you need a mentor. And often the stories are somebody found a mentor, that mentor found them and identified them. And
Right.
I did not want to leave it to chance, me getting this mentor that I so desperately needed. And so I looked around at the senior leaders in which I had connections with and identified those who I thought had the skills and operated in a way that I liked what they did. Right. So there was a woman who was in charge of um, IT who was at Emergent who, she was a top lady and she was getting stuff done and she was making things. And I was like, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, that's what's great. Maybe she should be my mentor. So I talked to her and another senior level in finance. And I liked the way he showed up in a meeting and I liked how he was on top of everything. And when everybody talks about leadership gravitas, he exuded gravitas and he was somebody that everybody was looking to as a leader in the org. And I thought, oh, okay, this is another person who I would like to figure out how to be like him. And then my mentor, Marvin, he was on our board, and I
Mm.
had dreams and aspirations of being on a board. And so I wanted to know him and how he got there. And I watched how he operated. I was sitting in the room, in the boardroom. So I get to watch how he operated and how people responded to him and the questions that he asked. And I thought, yeah, this is somebody else who I can learn from. And so it was just a matter of me, you know, taking the risk of going to somebody and the risk of being them saying, yeah, no, I don't really have the time. But instead, reaching out and asking if they would be willing to do this and knowing that the onus was on me to drive this relationship because I'm the one who asked, right? But thought it was an important thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, hustle is certainly in the toolkit as well, Shawnte, which is great. I think the other thing is this actually brings us back to our overarching topic here, which is, how to transcend your function. One of the things that I'm hearing is that you're talking to people who are in very different, subsets and functions to you. You're in legal, you're talking to somebody in finance, you're in legal, you're talking to someone in IT, and yet all of them have kind of come together, like a masterful dish, to to
Right.
to really create something quite special. So I think that in itself is great advice, which is don't just limit yourself to those that you see every day, right? Get
Yeah,
out, look wider, see who's there, and if there's a little spark or someone catches your eye with how they are, who they are, and maybe how they lead, then
absolutely.
it's worth going to explore.
Oh, that's for sure. I think leadership and good leadership and those soft intangible things about leadership do transcend function. And so you can really learn from anybody. And quite frankly, it's probably better outside of your function from a mentor perspective. Although, whoever is your senior most person within your function should probably be part of that list too. And mine was Aiden Curvis's mine as well. Uh, but but this also gives you an opportunity to learn something different. And one of the
Mm.
beautiful things I think about the legal function, it's we're very much like finance in that we touch everybody, every part of the business we have to know because we are the ones who are giving them business advice. We are the one negotiating their contracts. And so we got to understand what they do. And so very much like CFOs, it to do this job well, to do legal well at whatever level you are, whether it's general counsel or corporate counsel, being able to have connections and understanding of what the different functions are doing only helps you to be a better lawyer at what you're doing. So I've always tried to operate that way. And certainly I want my teams that are under me to be operating that way, to be business advisors and not just the lawyers who are the scribes.
Yeah, and it almost sounds like you went in with a service mentality, right? Which is how do I serve you as your legal representative, as somebody that is here to keep the company safe and again make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot.
I don't know
Um,
that I went in that way, but it's definitely something that I learned early on being within legal and how I wanted to show up and how I would be valuable to the organization. It's hard to be valuable if you're getting this piece of paper, and you're certainly hard to get the respect from your colleagues and get incorporated into the conversation and not be the bottleneck, but be the person who helps to be part of the team if you are sitting next to them and understanding what they do and can speak their language. And so I can speak the language of biologics manufacturers. I know upstream manufacturing and downstream processing. I can't do it, but I do know enough about it to be able to talk to them.
sure.
And so I think that that's important in order for us to do our job effectively.
Yeah, you seem to have become a multifunctional linguist. So in terms of kind of learning the languages of how they communicate, right? Because I feel like so much of the disconnect happens when there isn't that common language,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
there's a
Exactly right.
misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we obviously have spoken about it's important to transcend your function. We spoke about some of the ways that you can start to do it. I think by picking up little pieces here and there, and kind of navigating that. Um, how, in your opinion, when you think about your role as part of a C-suite, has it all come together? Because I'm sure you've seen situations of people maybe that haven't focused on that, and they maybe turn up a little too much like the emperor of their domain, opposed to maybe being part of the team. So how has it enabled you to facilitate the best decisions for the company,
Yeah.
and
I
actually
think
navigate some of those things?
I think the best decisions for the company are made when that C-suite is working together as a team. And it's not, I've been on C-suites where we show up to the meeting and we're all kind of functional leaders and we report out what's happening and we go in our circle and we go in our separate ways versus being in the room where everybody is communicating with each other, that somebody can challenge me or contracts are needed. And, I can provide them with the guidance as to, what are the holdup? What is the problem? What is the information that we need? Or even if we're talking about, the portfolio and the pipeline and the products that are in development, and we're all sitting at that team, regardless of our function, in providing our input and our thoughts and asking our questions, because none of our questions are silly, right? And so I think that is the way that, it's like an orchestra, like you're rowing a boat where everybody is rowing together. And the way that you do that is everybody is feeling comfortable and confident to share their information, share their skill set, but also to ask and to probe what somebody else's skill set is. And so I think, like I said, it just happens a lot more organically. If I can go to the research, to R&D team and say, okay, this is what you're doing. Are you sure you want to do it that way? Have you thought about this? Are you sure you want this vendor? Because I know somebody else, some other person is trying to execute a contract with another vendor who I think is doing essentially the same thing. So maybe you guys should talk to each other and put this work together to save some money. Everybody being able to look at each other, what everybody else is doing just helps things to be much more efficient. You can save money, you save time, you save energy. I'm not getting a contract at the last minute and I'm like, well, why are we doing this? We just
Yeah.
executed one yesterday. We want to in-license some technology and I can see, we've got 3 different platforms or 3 different opportunities. Which one are we going to choose? Why would we choose one versus the other? And I can, weigh those 2 deals based on the financials. I can weigh those 2 deals based on the provision, the deal terms that are being provided. And so again, if we're all sitting together as opposed to one group just looking at their own things by themselves and reporting out, then everything happens much more efficiently.
Yeah, and it sounds like there are maybe 3 or 4 different elements here, right? I've actually written down 4 things in front of me. One is about having the confidence to share, right? What you're thinking, maybe not just taking it as gospel and here we go, and actually to challenge what's being put in front of you. And actually on the flip side of that, maybe the need for toughness and resilience, because what I've often found in C-suites is that people are not shy. They will not pull their punches, and yet, if you were to take a half-baked leader and put them in that environment, it probably wouldn't end well. just being candid. So, how about some of those elements as well? About did you develop your toughness and resilience, and was it through do you have like favorite failures or things like that which kind of helped shape you, or is it how did you get there? I guess.
So it was definitely a process. It was a process of building confidence to speak in the room. Luckily, like I said, since I was at Immersion in the very early days, I got to be in the room with the executive team. So I got some practice. I also, had some successes, being if you're a thoughtful person and you're reading the material and you understand what's going on, and then you have a question and you ask that question and it's a reasonable question, having successes in that respect is important. I think also though, being in a culture in which questions are valued and questions are okay is a very important part of this picture too. And so luckily I've been in many cultures where I've seen both. I've seen cultures where questions were not really enjoyed. I've seen scenarios or cultures in which it was open to question, open to challenge, and so thankfully I started in a culture that was more open to challenge than not. Also, though, being with leaders who were very tough. And so you had to be ready. If you were have a challenge, if you were going to ask a question, you had to have your ducks in a row and understand that you do it or it wasn't good. I think so. I had the benefit of learning, how to show up in various places. And so that has served me well going forward. And now I try to do that now. I try to come into the room and ask the questions. And even if it isn't, and because now that I'm sitting at the table as a C-suite member, I do think it is important for me to demonstrate that to people lower in the organization, if I can, that this should be a place where you ask questions. People shouldn't be afraid. It shouldn't be silence. It shouldn't just be a readout. It should be a conversation. And if people lower in the organization, or more junior in the organization, see me operating that way in the stand that I sit in as a Black woman, then I think it helps a lot of younger folks feel comfortable and they're in the stand and to be able to take that step too. So I do think that that's an important role that I play.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like preparing for these meetings is also important.
That is important. Yes.
I know it sounds very obvious, but I think there are definitely people who don't.
And so I have experienced that where I have come into meetings and I haven't been prepared. And then you learn that's not the way you show up.
Yeah, you learn really fast.
It's been a learning exercise for me for sure.
Yeah, no, very good. And then I think, the other thing which we were talking about is this transcending your function and kind of coming out the top, becoming a broader business leader, working as part of a team, being comfortable with challenge, right? Being prepared, and knowing that the challenge is likely to come. So doing your homework, being able to come up with the decision. I'm sure there are decisions that have been made at companies which wouldn't have been the decisions that you would have made. But how important is it for that C-suite, once the decision is made, whether they agree with it or not, to get on the bus?
We're 100% important. I think, the ethos that I live under and that most executive teams do is that kind of what happens in that room stays in that room. And so it is super important for us, even if we are arguing or fighting or challenging the direction in which idea wins. At the end of the day, when we meet, we all have to be speaking in the same voice. And if we're not, then that just causes dissension within the organization and confusion. And I honestly, some situations are better than others. And every company I've been in, not everybody is good at it, but it is critically important, certainly on the big ones, that you're all speaking the same language.
Yeah. And a friend of mine recently actually turned around and said that in his perspective, being on a C-suite leadership team was basically one giant argument. But that's what you're hired to do, right? You are hired to challenge, because if there are no challenges,
that's right.
Well, that is just one person's opinion and going one way all the time, which I always found fascinating. So if we think about boards, in your experience, how are boards different to C-suites? Because we obviously think of your C team as operators, operational, obviously with a healthy dose of strategy in there. Well, hopefully anyway. And then we have boards, but boards are not operators.
No, it shouldn't
So
be.
how do we get that separation? And I guess, is there a mindset shift that has to happen when you become a board member?
Yeah, I have found in all my years sitting in the room that is the hardest mind shift for operators to do, is to stop being an operator and the leads. When you sit at the board table, you're thinking much more broadly about the whole organization. Your job is to represent the shareholders and to make sure that the management team is running the business in a way that will benefit the shareholders and other stakeholders as well. Some of those stakeholders being employees. And so you got to think much more broadly than the day-to-day mission, than the day-to-day operation or activities. But you got to think, much more long-term. And it's often hard to do as a public company for sure, because you are beholden to those shareholders, and those shareholders can be fickle, and your share price matters. And so it can be harder to have a longer-term vision, but you are thinking in a much more fiduciary duty mindset to the whole organization. And you got to think about, as an individual board member sitting at that chair, you aren't a functional expert. You know some things about a function, but you're not there. So as a general counsel in my day job. If I'm sitting on a board, I'm not the general counsel of this company. I can utilize the skills that I've learned as a general counsel, but I'm not the general counsel of this company. In the same way that a CFO or someone by CFO by training sitting on a board is not the CFO of this business. They can use their skills and their experience and their knowledge to challenge the executive team, to ask them questions, to make sure that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But you don't get in the weeds. I'm not providing legal advice. I'm not providing risk assessments. I am sitting at that table saying, okay, this is what you want to do. Did you guys ask this question? Did you think about this regulatory issue? Did you, what does your cybersecurity plan look like? Who has vetted that cybersecurity plan? Did you have any incidents, and what did those look like? So, my job sitting on in the seats and the board and the seat on the board is a much broader one and much more holistic one and much more strategic and wide ranging than what happens on the executive side. The executive side, you're, reporting out on, the minutia of what you're doing. You're thinking about that particular contract or the, various contracts that you're signing. You're thinking about the negotiation of all of the nitty gritty terms and that agreements. Whereas, if you're doing a divestiture, you are thinking about all of the terms of that divestiture. As a board, you're thinking, okay, how much money are we going to get? What does this mean for our portfolio? What does this mean for our business 3 to 5 years from now? And so it's just a bigger problem set that you were thinking about, I think.
And it's interesting because I've also heard it said that the board in many ways are the advisors to the CEO, right? So when the CEO is kind of out of experience, ideally you've got people on the board that they can go to and speak, one-on-one or something like that, in order to kind of fact check and effectively increase their decision-making power from that side of things. So I think the other thing which is interesting is maybe the difference between public company boards, private company boards, and the makeup of those things.
Yeah.
And I think you've got some experience of maybe seeing both sides. Do they differ? And I guess, what are the things that people should be maybe aware of before they even accept a board seat, right?
Yeah. So I think public company versus private company, all the boards, whether on public company, private company, have a fiduciary duty to the business. Think that oftentimes on a private company, the board members are shareholders. And so they hold the same seat, or they wear both of those hats. Whereas in public companies, it's usually a board of independent directors who don't have a large stake in the business. And so they are a bit more detached, a bit more, I'll use independent, because they don't have as much financial skin in the game as you find on the private company side. So I have found that to be a difference. But both boards are supposed to be thinking about the best interests of the company and how to make the company grow and how to make the company successful, and using their skills and expertise. And even so, like, as you just mentioned, the board can serve as advisors to different members of management, right? And so even on the private company side, probably even more so, because often the private company boards of directors are are sitting with younger companies. And so their skill sets could, be brought to bear a lot more directly, a lot more frequently, because these are, new companies and new founders and new C-suite members who probably don't have the skills and experience that is required to take this company to the next level. And so the board plays a really active role in that regard, maybe more operational in that regard, on the private company side.
For sure. And the other thing which I was thinking about with boards, I remember reading an article or listening to a podcast, and you were talking about diversity on boards and how important it is to have different backgrounds, different thought patterns, right? Not just essentially a set of lemmings all running off the same cliff. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, Shawnte, as to the benefits of that and what you've seen in that space?
Yeah, I think the diversity in the boardroom is an incredibly important thing to have, and it's been gratifying to see that there has been some movement in that area in the last several years. Not as much movement as I would like, um, but I do think that you're right. Traditionally, historically, as you look at the boards of most companies, the composition of the board has looked identical. Everybody has been white males, typically maybe a white female, kind of thrown in there. And the experience, and they generally probably come from the same socioeconomic background. And that's because they generally filled the board up with people that they knew were in their same group. Um, and so with different types of companies, you have different needs, you have different customers at the very least, right? And so having a set of board members who represent different areas of the world, different types of situations, different socioeconomic backgrounds, certainly males versus females will have a different perspective and bring something else to bear. I was recently looking at some various companies, and I saw a company in the women's health space, and their executive team was a bunch of men, white men, and their board was similar. And I thought, wow, they've got a very female centric medical device, and they don't have any women represented who are opining, making decisions, helping to make decisions at the top levels. And that just seemed weird. That seemed odd to me. And I am not taking anything away from them. I think they're probably very smart gentlemen and have done this for a really long time. But I do think that there is a perspective that would be provided by a woman who has experienced the actual things that they're trying to solve for, that they are probably missing. And even if they have a scientific advisor who they think checks that box, having somebody in the room who's always in the room to help to ask the questions that they may not think to ask, they likely won't think to ask because it's not their lived experience, I think is something that is missing. And so having boards that have a diverse group of folks, and that includes young people now, right? Where there is a whole different world. I'm just learning about AI, for example. It is a whole different world. And that is a generation apart from most of the people who are sitting on boards. And so having somebody who's in the room who has seen that and has touched it, who understands it, maybe not understand how large language models work, but certainly have played with ChatGPT in some sort of interesting way, or one of the other, it is an important asset to the business. I think that people, if you're not diverse, if you're not thinking about that, will miss out.
Yeah, and there was something which I heard recently, which I thought was really fascinating, and which is the concept of reverse mentorship. Now, I think people are probably familiar with this idea of, and for those that don't know, we'll use the example of an AI expert coming out of college, right, and joining a big company and getting to sit down one-on-one with the CEO to explain what AI does. And to them, it's, like using a pen, and to the CEO, it's like a totally different world.
Right.
But slowly the CEO gets the concept of, hang on a second, I can see how this applies to all of the parts of the business. I feel like the problem where companies go wrong is they then say to the college kid, thank you very much, goodbye. And they kind of put them back down to whatever level, opposed to, this is interesting. Why don't you come sit in on the meetings? Why don't you continue to contribute? And maybe it is more listening than talking for that individual. But I think, again, that's also part of that accelerated learning. And again, opening the mentoring opportunity, but continuing it in a more traditional vein so that it actually flows end to end.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting way to think about it. I think there's probably a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want that 20 something AI expert to actually be sitting in the boardroom all the time. However, I can see how this cross generational experience, this cross generational learning is a super important thing, and having some space for consultancy or some space for training, because education of the board is super important, and regular educating of the board on various topics is one of the things that the board members are supposed to be doing. And so that has a huge value add in terms of the training up, like you said, from a reverse perspective, as well as from another direction. And then that also gives that kid an opportunity, to your point, as you were mentioning earlier, that they get to sit in the room and see where it happens, see how the decisions are made, see what it's like to sit in that space. And I do think that that is a valuable thing for somebody to have early on as they are early in their career, trying to think about what they want to do and what their aspirations are. To be exposed to that is important because as we talked about, being in the boardroom is different. It's a different space. They're talking about different things. They're comporting themselves in a different way. And so, yeah, to get your glimpse into that. And I was really fortunate to be able to sit in that space and just be quiet and take notes, but still get to understand what it means to be in a corporate board and what it means to be particularly in a public company board and what they're thinking about.
For sure. And my thought was, if they don't have somebody from their own company, they'll probably go to Deloitte or McKinsey, who will charge them a fortune to do exactly the same thing. And no disrespect to those companies, they're very valuable to all of us. So the other part of this, which I think is important, is women in leadership, Shawnte, and I know that you belong to the How Women Network, and I'd love for you to kind of talk a little more about this, because I think, there are certain maybe women networks that are very robust in their advertising and things like that. And you see them everywhere. I hadn't seen too much about that, the How Women Network, and that could just be my own fault. But we'd love to hear a little more, understand the mission of that, and really just love to give you the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. So, How Women Lead and How Women Invest and How Women Give are kind of sister organizations. I started with How Women Invest. It's kind of my passion project, actually, because their focus is in venture, and it has a twofold mission. The first mission is to educate women, and particularly women who have, or affluent women who have access to capital, but don't know what to do with it and haven't been taught what to do with it, because traditionally women have been told that we aren't supposed to do those things. Men do those things. And so it's giving women education and permission to take an active role in their portfolio, internal home portfolio management, and to feel comfortable and confident in doing it. And at the same time, it's trying to solve or crack or address, one of the challenges in our current system, in which, there's lots of venture capital dollars that are being spent, but most of those venture capital dollars are not being spent in female-led organizations, female-founded companies, and particularly companies with women of color as founders or as leaders. They only get something like, 2.5 to 3% of the venture dollars that are available. And so Julie Castro Abrams started this organization, How Women Invest, and created some investor funds for participation so that women can get access to venture fund opportunities, can get access to making money in this way where other people are making money, but also to deploy these dollars into really well-run companies that are founded by women who have difficulties getting access to funds. And so I just think it's a beautiful thing, and put my money where my mouth is, and I evangelize it to anybody who will ask. But then How Women Lead is the overarching organization, and the idea, again, from Julie Castro Abrams, is that it is about women helping women, that we are a force to be reckoned with, and we have capital, we have connections, we have companies, we do all the things. And so we should be visible to support one another. We should be helping one another whatever way we can. And one of those is in, getting more women on corporate boards, having there was some advocacy work. There's some policy work and advocacy work on the abortion issue. There's some policy and advocacy work on diversity on boards. And so it's about getting out there and participating and helping other women to be both domestically and internationally. There's a whole other arm that's focused on supporting women founders in various countries, so that they can have a mentor here to help them to scale their businesses. It's a whole kind of ecosystem around supporting women and helping women to thrive and be successful and to grow. And so I'm super excited, happy to be part of it. And definitely, like I said, put my money where my mouth is on this.
Yeah, great. And if I remember correctly, it was this organization that also helped drive the bill in California to obviously have female representation on boards. So
Right.
not just a fluff pet project, but also, a company which is driving real change,
Absolutely.
and making a difference.
Absolutely.
So just so I know, and of course everyone listening knows, where can people find out more information about that?
Yeah, the website is, or you can just put in your Google machine, how women invest or how women lead. And either of those in the search engine will take you to the website.
Beautiful. We'll also make sure that it's in the kind of show notes, as it
Okay.
were,
You're
so
welcome.
that people can look at that, and go from there. So, Shawnte, I'm absolutely not shocked to hear, all of this great advice, that you've
Mhm.
been able to share with people. I mean, from the moment we met, which was many years ago, um, it, you really kind of had a huge impact. And so I think thank you, for sharing that. There are the way that I always say this is, sometimes we never know who's going to listen to this podcast, but if it just makes one person go, ah, okay, I got it. Who knows? Maybe that's the one person that really kind of comes
Absolutely.
along and changes our industry. So thank you very much, for sharing your wisdom. And ultimately, if people want to reach out on LinkedIn or things like that, are you happen for them
Yeah,
to
please
send?
feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Um, I'm very happy to and very happy to get, messages. Again, my passion projects are to support women generally, and particularly women of color, because
Sure.
it could be tough out there for us women of color to try to navigate all of these things and be all that we can be. We've got these dreams and aspirations and lots of people and things and structures and systems making it difficult to do that. And so it's only through us helping one another that we can move the needle and move forward. And so I'm happy to help anybody else and to share whatever I can share. I'm still fighting the game myself, but I'm happy to share whatever with them or whatever experience that I've got that could be helpful to somebody else for sure.
Yeah. Well, if you're still fighting the game, my money's on you to win. So
Right.
that's as simple as it goes. Well, look, thank you so much. I look forward to staying in touch, and obviously,
Absolutely.
if anything kind of comes back or there are other subjects, love to have you back on.